All right, let's have a look at passage 4, questions 13 to 16. This passage talks about America's teenagers, America's adolescents, and how they're not doing well. Then the author tries to explore what are the reasons that they're not doing well, right? So the author quotes two psychologists, psychoanalysts, Erik Erikson and later on Freud, to explore the reasons as to why they are not doing well. Okay, so for instance, Erikson said that the danger for them was diffusion when they needed identity, right? So there were a lot of contradictions, conflicts that they were facing. Okay, then this it said that these conflicts can actually make them depressed, right? Can also result in psychosomatic illnesses. This was Erickson's view, right? This is what he surmised from his work with patients in the hospital. Later on, he talked about how what will happen when the world becomes more globalized, when there is a technological revolution. So he talked about this in the 1950s. So the author says that what he talked about in the 1950s now appears to be very prophetic, as if it's coming to be true. Then there's an example of a person B given to us where she's confused about her identity. She or he is, no, she's confused about her identity. I don't know the pronoun that she uses. Then we talk about how identity politics also comes into the equation. Okay, how it comes into the equation when we talk about America's teenagers. Then we give the views of Freud. That Freud talked about how it was a decisive time for teenagers, right? And how this is what separated them. Adolescence is what separated them from previous generations. And or if those issues were perhaps not addressed, then on the other side of the adolescence, a person could be psychiatrically ill. So these are the issues that are discussed in this passage broadly. That America's teenagers are not doing well, then exploring some reasons behind it, and giving the views of two psychoanalysts, Erikson and Freud. 14th. From the passage, it can be inferred that American adolescents were fundamentally unable to effectively deal with their adolescence because why were they unable to deal effectively with their adolescence? They could not recognize their identities. Okay, we'll see if that is the case. The identity politics being played out in the country caused further mental confusion. So we look at the sentence that talks about identity politics. They were not rooted in any one culture. Is this mentioned in the passage? I don't think that this has been mentioned as the reason as to why they are unable to deal effectively with their adolescence. Okay. D. The conflicts they faced during their adolescence were not alleviated, were not addressed, were not reduced substantially. Okay, we'll see this also. So let's check all of these, and very doubtful that C is the answer, but let's see. Okay. So in the previous question also, and here when we talk about Erickson's views in the 1950s, we have already discussed that their identity is not grounded in accrued cultural sensibilities, but rather the unstable ideal of being able to choose in any direction at any moment. So it's not like they could not recognize their identities. It's that their identity was pretty unstable. Okay, they could choose in one moment, in one direction at one moment, and toward they could go towards another direction in another moment. So unstable identity, and not really the fact that they could not recognize it. That's a different issue when you're just unable to recognize it. This is about choice. They have the choice to go in multiple directions. This has to do with choice. Okay, then we talk about how their issues were not addressed, right? So let's see if that is the case. Their issues were not addressed. So he said that society, he wrote, must lighten the conflicts for our children through a promise of security, identity, and integrity that allows for true spontaneity and flexibility that alone can keep a person intact. So we must lighten their conflicts. Okay, and in fact, if you look at the previous paragraph, we do talk about the extreme contradictions they face. So why are they not doing well? Because they are facing extreme contradictions. Then Erickson advises that we must try to lighten the conflicts. And later, when we talk about Freud also said that, in case these issues are not addressed, okay, what happens then? One is only properly psychiatrically ill on the other side of adolescence, which seems to shuffle us into various forms of neurosis and psychosis. Most psychotic breaks occur during or in the years following puberty. So, if these conflicts are not addressed, what happens is that they become psychiatrically ill on the other side of adolescence. Right. So, these three sentences that are given to us, these three instances that I just read out for you, they substantiate the, don't they? They substantiated that the conflicts they faced during their adolescence were not reduced substantially. That is why perhaps they were unable to deal with it, their adolescence, effectively. That is why they became psychiatrically ill later on. Okay, not recognizing we have eliminated. Let's look at the bit about identity politics. Not rooted in any one culture is not there in the passage. Identity politics is here. Identity politics, so fraught on both sides of America's political divide, was not the cause of B's pain. Okay, it was not the cause of this adolescent's pain. In fact, identity politics is born from the suffering our adolescents pinpoint. So, adolescent suffering gives rise to identity politics. It gives rise to identity politics. It is not the other way round. It is not the other way round. So our option says that identity politics leads to further mental confusion. Whereas what my paragraph says is that adolescent suffering gives birth to identity politics. So that becomes distorted then. That option becomes distorted and not rooted in any one culture. Culture word has not really been mentioned. We just talk about there not being grounded in any one, in accrued cultural sensibilities. Okay, that does not mean that they are not grounded in any one culture, right? So one culture is distorted, and even our third option is also distorted. Our second option is also distorted. Okay, cause effect relationship has been inverted here. So that tells me, while this is again false, these two are distorted. D, I gave you three areas from where collectively D can be inferred. This was a slightly difficult question because it required a thorough understanding of the passage.